Welcome to On the Money Line, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsom and I'm here to break down UFC Vegas 58, which goes down this weekend at the Apex in Vegas. But as always, just before we get into the breakdowns, remember there is going to be a Baze AI UFC prediction software recap from last weekend at UFC 276. And I can tell you to make sure you don't miss that because Baze AI has broken its own record for straight pick accuracy percentages across a single event. It hit 100%. So I'll be breaking that down. I'll talk about that from last weekend, but like I said, 100% is absolutely insane, especially coming off 4 weeks of 82%, 77%, 67%, 72%, and then now we're at 100%. The Baze AI special, I've been saying it for a while, it's getting better and better. I absolutely love it. Make sure you don't miss that breakdown and that recap, which will be in the Baze AI playlist on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/MMA Play 365. But now into the breakdowns for this weekend. That's why you're all here. The main event's actually a really good one, and that's obviously where we start. We've got Rafael dos Anjos versus Rafael Fiziev. So Rafael does have to win in this fight. Now, I've been massively high on Rafael Fiziev. I think his qualities, his skill set is outstanding. I bet him against Moicano when a lot of people were betting the plus money on Moicano. I also bet him against Brad Riddell when, again, a lot of people were betting the plus money on Brad Riddell. I just believe in Rafael Fiziev's ability, skill set, and his qualities. He's a phenomenal fighter. And when I saw this fight, I thought that it was a fight that the UFC are just giving Rafael Fiziev to, get a good name on his record, because Rafael dos Anjos is a veteran, he's an ex-champion, he's been around the top of the division in multiple weight categories. So I feel that the UFC were really doing Fiziev a favour here to make sure he's got a good name on his record. So moving forwards, it's going to look more attractive for future opponents. And I get that, that's the way it works. But after watching tape, I actually think this fight is going to be much closer than I thought. And one of the main reasons for that is Rafael dos Anjos' wrestling. He's really started honing in on that wrestling in his last couple of fights, and it's always been there in his career because he's always been a legit BJJ black belt with good submissions, good positioning on top. And again, that's another massive area for him in this fight as well in regards to the top side grappling. His grappling game is amazing, and also, like I said, his wrestling is equally as good. And I think that's what's going to make this fight close. Now, for the moments where they're standing and they're exchanging on the feet, I don't think dos Anjos is going to be completely out of his depth, but for sure, I think that dos Anjos is going to get pieced up a little bit from Fiziev. Fiziev's technical ability, striking-wise, I don't think there's many that come close to him in the division. So I think from a stand-up, a striking perspective, I think the edge is with Fiziev, although, like I said, I don't think he's going to completely blow dos Anjos out the water, but I do definitely think the striking edge is with Fiziev. But like I said, this is a mixed martial arts fight, and I think that the more that Fiziev comes on with the striking, I think it's only going to make dos Anjos want to wrestle and grapple with him more. So that's going to push that urgency from dos Anjos, and that's why I think the fight is going to be quite close. I definitely think that once the wrestling and grappling starts being mixed in, Fiziev's not easy to take down, and he doesn't look to have a bad defensive grappling game, but Rafael dos Anjos, I believe, is better than anybody that Fiziev's fought from that wrestling and grappling scenario that dos Anjos can bring. Like I said, he's legit, and he's done it against the best in the world for years and years and years. That's what's going to make the fight close, to the point where I'm even going to be surprising myself. I know I'm going to surprise a lot of people that are listening to the breakdown. I didn't think I would be picking against Rafael Fiziev in this fight, but I just think the veteran qualities of Rafael dos Anjos and that wrestling and grappling, if it's mixed in well, which you have to assume it will, because Fiziev's going to be so much better on the feet, I do think that that's going to really change things in this fight. I think it's going to also disrupt the flow state of Fiziev if he's starting to have to think about takedowns coming in and getting back up to his feet as well. Fiziev can slow down just a little bit, whereas we know Rafael dos Anjos can go a full 5 rounds, no problem. So with all these things putting together, it is edging me slightly over to Rafael dos Anjos. So I'm picking Rafael dos Anjos to win this fight. And in the co-main event, I absolutely love this fight. We've got Caio Borralho versus Armen Petrosyan. Now, Caio Borralho was a fighter I reluctantly bet against in his UFC debut. I was on the side of Omar Gadzhiev, and Caio Borralho absolutely ran through Omar Gadzhiev. I do think Omar Gadzhiev should have won by DQ, but that's a different topic. But Caio Borralho has got some serious skills in regards to his ground game, in his jiu-jitsu. And then Armen Petrosyan in his UFC debut, I bet him at plus money against Gregory Rodriguez, again reluctantly, because I like Gregory Rodriguez as well, but that plus money side was attractive, and I thought it was going to be a close enough fight to make that have value, and it absolutely did. Now the UFC are matching both of these guys together, and I almost think that Armen Petrosyan, and I could be a little bit off here, but I think there is some truth behind it, is I believe that Armen Petrosyan has already beaten in his last fight a better version of Caio Borralho, because Gregory Rodriguez has got better striking, he's got good power. I think his wrestling or his trips, his judo, his throws are better than the takedowns of Caio Borralho as well. And in regards to the jiu-jitsu, let's not forget Gregory Rodriguez is a world champion in BJJ, so arguably a better BJJ player as well. I will say one thing about the BJJ though, Caio Borralho's control once he has a fighter settled on the mat is better than what we see from Gregory Rodriguez, but Gregory Rodriguez is still a beast on the mat. He's a legit BJJ black belt. So I kind of feel that not only is Armen Petrosyan just beaten a better version of Caio Borralho, a more experienced version of Caio Borralho, but Armen Petrosyan has spent his career training in Dagestan. He's fought a ton of Russian fighters that want to take him down, and he constantly gets taken down, but he gets back up to his feet straight away. He does have good takedown defense. You can get him down eventually, but he will get back up to his feet. And if you watch his fights in chronological order, you can see the progression and the development in that area of his game. And for somebody that's such a decorated kickboxer, a really sharp kickboxer, good fundamentals, good power, good straight shots, really mixes things up well, can fight well moving backwards, can fight just as well moving forwards. For somebody like that to have developed his defensive wrestling and his get-up game in somewhere like Russia and Dagestan against fighters that just want to take him down, I feel like he's going to be more than prepared for this fight. The one area of concern for Armen Petrosyan is if he does get taken down and settled, then Caio Borralho does seem to find a good way to the back, sinks that body triangle in, and then it's really tough to shake him off there. But even still, Gregory Rodriguez had Armen Petrosyan in a body triangle, and Petrosyan still got back up to his feet. So I kind of feel like, although Caio Borralho is a beast and he's a phenom in his own right, I definitely think he's got a high ceiling in MMA and in his UFC career. I do feel in this fight that Armen Petrosyan's got the tools and he's going to be more than prepared to be dealing with what Caio Borralho is going to be giving to him, because that's what he's had to deal with for pretty much his entire career. So for that reason, I'm going to be picking Armen Petrosyan to win this fight. And in the next fight, this should be a fun one. We've got Nurmagomedov versus Douglas Silva de Andrade. Now, Douglas Silva de Andrade obviously coming off a great win in his last fight against Sergey Morozov, but he didn't come without struggles. De Andrade definitely had problems. He was dropped in the first round. He was hurt, and look, this guy's got insane. He's got an insane build, insane strength. He's got a big one-hitter-quitter type of punch, so that's something Said Nurmagomedov's got to be careful of. But outside that, I think that Said Nurmagomedov's going to absolutely school Douglas Silva de Andrade as long as he doesn't get hit with that punch. But this is the thing, Nurmagomedov is very, very good at being elusive, staying at range. He doesn't get hit too often, and we've got to not confuse him with the rest of the Nurmagomedov family, because Said Nurmagomedov, although he does have wrestling and a decent topside grappling game, he is predominantly a striker. He's a kickboxer, but he's one of these elusive types of Russians, a little bit like Zahabi Magomed Sharipov in regards to, just being light on the feet, elusive, good striking, good accuracy. And this is ultimately what's going to piece Douglas Silva de Andrade up, in my opinion, because can Douglas Silva de Andrade wrestle him? He can try, but again, it's difficult to take Said Nurmagomedov down. And just like I said with Armen Petrosyan in the last fight, Nurmagomedov is one of these types of fighters where every opponent seems to want to take him down because of his striking qualities. So Nurmagomedov has had a career used to being able to defend takedowns and growing in that area of his game. I think Douglas Silva de Andrade is going to be constantly trying to get into range. I think he's going to be chasing the fight. I think he's going to be trying to land the one big shot that ultimately isn't going to come because of the defensive work and the elusiveness of Said Nurmagomedov, which is going to allow Said Nurmagomedov not only to tire Douglas Silva de Andrade out, but also to really push on with his own game, land good strikes, really start picking away at Douglas Silva de Andrade and just pulling away with the fight, maybe a finish late in the fight, or a potential early finish. We've seen that a couple of times from Nurmagomedov. But if this fight does go to a decision, then again, I favour Nurmagomedov. So whichever way I'm looking at it, I'm picking Said Nurmagomedov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an interesting one on the main card, actually. We've got Jamie Pickett versus Denis Tiuliulin. Now, Denis Tiuliulin absolutely had a horrific UFC debut, getting put in there against Khizriev, who is an absolute beast. And I think that Denis Tiuliulin actually dealt with that fight pretty well, if I'm being honest, because he dealt with the initial takedowns. Obviously, he did succumb, which pretty much every fighter does with a fighter like Khizriev. But Denis Tiuliulin's also a really aggressive striker, good forward pressure. He'll run through strikes himself to land his own. And like I said, I think he even tried taking Khizriev down as well, if I remember correctly. So he's got a wrestling game himself, although his predominant style is striking. So I think that Denis Tiuliulin is a fighter that if he starts putting some wins together, I think he could be very interesting to watch. And like I said, the aggressive nature, just coming forward with bombs and just looking to overwhelm his opponent with what he's got to offer. And I think against somebody like Jamie Pickett, who has a history of being a little bit gun shy, don't get me wrong, Pickett's had now a couple of wins in the UFC, good wins, Starapoli being one of them. And I think that Jamie Pickett has won fights where we have predicted him to lose, but also in previous fights, you can't still ignore that he has been gun shy in previous fights. And I do believe in this type of fight, if he's being pushed back a little bit, if he's being overwhelmed by the pressure of Tiuliulin, then I do think that he might have that gun shy attribute coming back into this fight, which is not going to be good for him because it's going to allow Tiuliulin to keep pushing forwards, to keep coming on, to land hard strikes. And I don't think that Pickett's takedown, wrestling and grappling game is going to be good enough to really shut down Tiuliulin and force the fight into the area where Tiuliulin's less comfortable. I think Tiuliulin faced a better wrestler and grappler in Khizriev. The one thing that is concerning with Tiuliulin is that cardio. He did tire out really badly against Khizriev, but I kind of want to give him a pass for that because of the pressure that Khizriev puts on him, because of the relentless wrestling that Tiuliulin had to deal with. And when you're not a wrestler and you've got to deal with that wrestling heavy pressure, it can tire you out. So I will give Tiuliulin a slight pass on that cardio on the last fight. I'll definitely be keeping an eye out for it in this fight. But I do think that although Pickett has been winning some fights and he has been showing that he's better than what we originally thought, I think someone like Denis Tiuliulin is going to be really able to push forwards, be aggressive, overwhelming with volume, land some power shots. The judges will like it. It'll give him a good finishing opportunity as well. And for those reasons, I'm picking Denis Tiuliulin to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jared Vanderaa versus Chase Sherman. I love the UFC for actually giving Sherman this fight because it did feel like when they brought him back for now a third time, I think it was like a week or two after they cut him for the second time. Obviously, he was then put into, be that fighter against Alexander Romanov, which not a lot of fighters will have been putting their hands up for that fight. But Chase Sherman took it in regards to him receiving another contract from the UFC on the other side in his favour. So the UFC could have been a little bit naughty to him and given him another, absolute solid beast that's just going to run through him. But Jared Vanderaa isn't that fighter. He's not the fighter that's going to, like a Romanov, that's going to absolutely tear through Chase Sherman, cause problems and just absolutely run through him. Chase Sherman's got a winnable fight here, but whether he wins it is a different question. Jared Vandera's got a decent striking game. He's got a decent wrestling game as well. And when he gets on top, he can do good work on top. He fell short against Oleinik, but grappling with Alexei Oleinik is never the greatest idea, and it's not advisable for most fighters that fight Oleinik. But Jared Vanderaa tried, and for that reason you can see that he's got the confidence in that wrestling game. Now Chase Sherman's going to be game in this fight. I actually think it's going to be a relatively close fight as well. I think the betting line's just a little bit too wide. It should be a little bit shorter, but I do think that Jared Vanderaa is the rightful favourite in this fight, just because I think that his qualities are slightly better in more areas. So like I said, I think he's a better wrestler. I think he's a better topside grappler, and the striking's going to be quite close as well, although I will maybe give Sherman the slight edge because of the low kicks, but even so, I think it's going to be relatively close in that aspect. But because Vandera's got that wrestling and that grappling in his back pocket, I have to be siding with Jared Vanderaa, who, like I said, it's going to be close on the feet, but he's just got more ways to win this fight. So for that reason, I'm picking Jared Vanderaa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Michael Johnson versus Jamie Mullarkey. Michael Johnson had a good fight last time out. He feels like he was in a dark place and he's come out of it, and he feels much better around his quality of training, how he feels mentally, how he feels physically, and how he's performing inside the cage. So you do have to take that into consideration. It's got to be something you think about, because if he genuinely was in a dark place, and that can explain some really subpar performances. But against Jamie Mullarkey, I think this is a fight that Michael Johnson is going to find quite difficult, because Johnson, I don't think he's going to be able to just come forward and get away with just throwing volume at Jamie Mullarkey. Jamie Mullarkey's a dog, and actually in his last fight, you can argue, well, Jamie Mullarkey was was stopped really early, but look at what Jalen Turner has done since then. Obviously, last weekend against Brad Riddell, Jalen Turner's a special fighter, and I don't think you can put too much stock in that Jamie Mullarkey loss last time out. I think Jamie Mullarkey's a dog fighter, he's grittier, he's got wrestling, he's got topside grappling, and he's also a good striker with decent power as well. And I think Michael Johnson's going to have a tough time inside the cage. It's going to be interesting to see if Michael Johnson is this new and, sort of not improved fighter, but back to his best type of fighter like he's claiming he was in his last fight. So it's going to be interesting to see what type of performance Johnson puts out there. But from what I'm seeing with the eye, like I said, Jamie Mullarkey is going to match him striking. I think Jamie Mullarkey's actually got more power as well. I think Jamie Mullarkey's the better wrestler, the more likely active wrestler who's going to be able to look for takedowns and complete takedowns. And I think the top side game of Mullarkey is better than the defensive bottom side game of Michael Johnson as well. So I think Michael Johnson's in for a tough fight on Saturday night. I don't think it's going to be a complete whitewash, but I do think Jamie Mullarkey is the better fighter. I think it'll show relatively visibly on the night. So I'm picking Jamie Mullarkey to win this fight. And in the next fight, an interesting one between Cynthia Calvillo and Nina Nunes. Now, Cynthia Calvillo is, we know what we're going to get from her. Her striking, I feel, has plateaued, not in a real negative way. I just feel that she's an okay striker, and the striking's probably as good as it's going to get. Whereas Nina Nunes from the other side, I think her striking's going to be a bit better. I think her punches are going to be straighter. I think they're going to be longer. I think she's going to be more effective on the feet. But the thing is with Cynthia Calvillo, she's going to be looking for takedowns in this fight, in my opinion. And I think she's going to be able to get them. And when she does get the takedown, she gets top side control over Nina Nunes. I do think that she's going to cause a lot of problems. I don't think Nina Nunes is terrible defensively from a BJJ perspective, but I just think Cynthia Calvillo's better. Her offensive game is better than the defensive game of Nunes, and I think that's what's going to cause the issues. I think on the mat, Calvillo's going to be live for a submission. If she doesn't get the submission, I think she's going to have enough control time to be able to steal rounds here. I do believe the fight is going to be won and lost in that wrestling and grappling scenario because Calvillo will force that side of the game, in my opinion. The only concern from Calvillo is she has had fights in the past where she's thinking of testing her striking and just forgets about her wrestling and grappling qualities and looks to try and outstrike her opponent. If that happens in this fight, it's going to be ultra close, super close, and I think Nunes could end up stealing a fight if it's a 15-minute kickboxing fight, but I just don't think it's going to be. I think Calvillo's going to force the action with the wrestling and grappling. That's where the fight's more likely to have the better action. Therefore, that's where the fight's more likely to be won and lost, and that's the area that Cynthia Calvillo's better in. So I'm picking Cynthia Calvillo to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Aiemann Zahabi versus Ricky Turcios. Obviously, Zahabi is the brother of the TriStar owner, and he's had hype behind him, for years. He did have a little bit of a layoff, but he's always had hype behind him because of his brother. And I've never totally been sold on Aiemann Zahabi. I don't think he's a terrible fighter at all, but I do have my questions about him. I've always had my questions about him. And I think with Ricky Turcios, I think this is a really bad matchup for Aiemann Zahabi because Ricky Turcios is an ultra dog fighter. He's a guy that'll get in your face, will keep coming forward. He'll take all your punches. He's very difficult to put away, really durable, good cardio. He can strike at range. He can strike in boxing range. He can do good work inside the clinch. He can secure takedowns. He's got a good topside game. He's got good jiu-jitsu. That's where his foundations are. And I think that Ricky Turcios, although his ceiling's a little bit unknown in the UFC, in my opinion, I'm not 100% sure how high he goes, but I do think in this fight against Aiemann Zahabi is just going to be really overwhelming, really in Zahabi's face. I think Zahabi's going to be on the back foot a lot. I think he's probably going to end up being a little bit gun-shy just because of how in your face Ricky Turcios is, the pace, the pressure that he puts on you. So I think it's just going to stun Aiemann Zahabi a little bit to the point where I'm not sure how much he's going to be able to get off on Turcios. I think Turcios is going to be a problem for him wherever the fight goes. The pace, the pressure, the striking, the fighting in close quarters, the clinching, wrestling, grappling. I think Turcios has got it all for Aiemann Zahabi in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ricky Turcios to win this fight. And in the next fight, talking about a fighter that's going to have too much for the opponent, we've got Antonina Shevchenko versus Cortney Casey. And I think the same in this fight from Antonina Shevchenko's perspective. I think she's the better striker. I think she's the better fighter at range. I think she'll be the better fighter in the clinch. I think she's going to be the better wrestler. We have seen a good wrestling game from Shevchenko previously, especially against for example, Ariane Lipski, where she controlled her from a wrestling and grappling scenario. And I also think she's got better BJJ than Courtney Casey as well. Now, Courtney Casey has got a knack for making fights close and can make fights a lot closer than what they should have been in hindsight. And I think she's going to be a fighter that, she's always been that fighter that can keep herself in a fight, even if she is outmatched. So I don't think it's going to be necessarily easy for Antonina Shevchenko, but I do think Shevchenko is going to have advantages in every area in this fight, and I think it's going to show. Like I said, I think she's going to be the better striker at all ranges, the better wrestler, the better grappler. It's tough to see where Courtney Casey wins this fight, and the reason being is because, like I say, I just think she's going to be outgunned in every area. And is she going to knock Shevchenko out? Highly unlikely. She's going to be able to take Shevchenko down frequently, often, and keep her down. It's unlikely. Therefore, the submission's unlikely. Is she going to be able to out-volume her over 3 rounds to win a decision? Unlikely. So you see where I'm going with this, but I'm picking Antonina Shevchenko to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an interesting one, which is a pick'em, by the way. We've got Cody Brundage versus Tresean Gore. And I think it's a pick'em for an absolute reason. It's a really difficult fight to not only analyse, but to come up with a solid prediction of who's going to win the fight, because you've got this clash of styles. You've got Tresean Gore, who's going to be the better striker, by far the better striker. I actually think Tresean Gore's a really underrated striker. His striking game is very, very good. When he really lets his hands go, he's calculated, he's sharp, he's crisp, he's powerful, he can knock you out. And I think that's going to be where Cody Brundage has got to be very careful. But on the flip side, we've seen Tresean Gore taken down. That's definitely one part of his game. He's got that Muay Thai style where he can stand a little bit too straight. And someone like Cody Brundage, who will be looking for the takedowns in this fight, should be able to get in on the takedowns. But then Tresean Gore's not got the most terrible takedown defense, and he can get back up to his feet eventually. And because of that, you can see where this fight's going to be quite close, because you can't be overly convinced that Brundage is going to have a ton of success for 15 minutes with wrestling and grappling against Gore. But then also, if Gore's going to be thinking about the wrestling and grappling coming at him, he might be a little bit hesitant to really let his hands go. So we could end up seeing like a low volume, true mixed martial arts fight where it's just very close as you're going through the gears and as you're going through the fight. And like I said, because of that, it's very difficult to pick a winner. But I am going to side with Tresean Gore because I do like his striking style. I do think that he's a sharp striker, he's got power, and he's got that finishing ability. Whereas if Cody Brundage wins this fight, it's going to be a grind, it's going to be very close. But if Gore wins this fight, it's more likely to be less close than what it would be with a Brundage win, if that makes sense. I think that, like I say, it's a really close fight, it's good matchmaking, and it's going to be an interesting watch for the clash of styles. I am going to very slightly side with Gore though, so I'm picking Tresean Gore to win this fight. And in the next fight, this should be a fun one. We've got Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Karl Roberson. And both fighters are going to get what they want here. I feel like both fighters hate it when they're coming up against a wrestler and a grappler that's constantly trying to take him down, that won't give him any space, won't give him any time to work. The distance is being closed, the pace is being dictated from their opponents. They're both predominant strikers, and they both just love letting the hands go and the feet go and just mixing everything up on the feet. And I think both fighters are going to really enjoy this fight, and I think they'll have snapped up the chance when the UFC offered them the fight to face each other, just because it's very unlikely the fighter's going to be looking for a takedown. If they do, though, if there is a fighter that does look for a takedown, it is more likely to be Karl Roberson, in my opinion. But I don't think he's going to have a ton of success with it. Definitely, I don't think the fight's going to be won and lost with what happens on the mat, should there be wrestling and grappling scenarios. So the one thing that Kennedy Nzechukwu is going to have an advantage in this fight is his height, his reach, his length. I think it's going to cause Karl Roberson some problems. However, I just think Karl Roberson's the more lethal, more decisive striker that will come forwards, that will put pressure on, that will really just commit to everything that he does, put crisp combinations together. He'll mix it to the legs with low kicks, he'll mix it to the body, to the head. So although Kennedy Nzechukwu is going to have the advantages from a height and a reach perspective, all that's going to do is just make Karl Roberson take a little bit more time to get his reads in, to find his way into range. But I think once he does get into range, and I think he will get into range, I do believe that Karl Roberson's going to really put some nice strikes together. I think Kennedy Nzechukwu is going to start falling very, very, very slightly behind on the numbers, on the volume, and I think Karl Roberson's just going to slightly pull away with the fight the longer the fight goes on. I'd be surprised if there's a knockout here. Both fighters are durable enough, I think, to withstand each other's attack, but I do think that Karl Roberson is going to put the better strikes together. The volume's going to be close to fight. I think it's going to be close. I just think Karl Roberson's that slightly cleaner, crisper striker. So for that reason, I'm picking Karl Roberson to win this fight. And in the final fight of this breakdown podcast of On the Moneyline, and I cannot believe this is the first fight of the night. I'm wondering if the UFC are going to end up switching the bout order, because this fight is my favourite fight on the entire card by an absolute mile. We've got Ronnie Lawrence versus Saidyokub Kakhramonov. And the reason why this is this is my favourite fight on the entire card is because both fighters are prospects, both fighters are young in the career, both fighters are developing, both fighters are at great camps. And I think the UFC are matching these two up at an absolute phenomenal stage in the career. A lot of people hate it when the UFC match prospect versus prospect. I love it because it really shows who's on that better trajectory, who's the better fighter right now. One fighter will surge up the rankings with a load of hype. The other fighter will drop a little bit behind, but it'll also mean that other fighter will be able to work back up. And we've seen it so many times in these prospect fights where one prospect absolutely surges and the other prospect really drops down. But then you see the prospect that loses in that fight just make a resurgence and start climbing up the rankings again. So I love this fight. I think that Ronnie Lawrence is a relentless wrestler. He's a wrestler that's completed 26 takedowns in the UFC so far over 3 fights. He completes 9 takedowns on average per 15 minutes. He's got a 78% completion rate with his takedowns as well. So everything that Ronnie Lawrence does in this wrestling and grappling scenario is just phenomenal. And like I've just touched upon the grappling there as well, Ronnie Lawrence has got decent topside grappling. He's positionally aware. He can leave gaps every now and again for his opponents to escape back up to the feet. And I suppose the one argument there is the fact that he's landed and completed so many takedowns in the UFC does tell you that his opponents more often than not make their way back up to the feet. But just like a Merab Dvalishvili, just like a Curtis Blades, when you start to accrue volume with the takedowns, when you're starting to land 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 takedowns in a fight, it then becomes really hard for the judges to ignore, even if nothing's happened after that, just because of your sheer relentlessness and the sheer volume in those takedown completion. So I think what Ronnie Lawrence offers is a nightmare for any opponent. But then you look at Saidyokub Kakhramonov. Kakhramonov's fought the likes of Umar Nurmagomedov before outside of the UFC. He's dealt with a wrestling heavy attack. He's been taken down. He can be taken down, although he does have good takedown defense, but he can get right back up to his feet. The only problem Kakhramonov has is when his opponent can settle him on his back. Once he gets settled, that's where he can look a little stuck at times. But to get him settled, you've got to go through a lot because, like I said, he defends a takedown well and he'll scramble back up, start to look to scramble straight back up to his feet once he's taken down as well. So it's very difficult to settle him. And then when you look at the striking of both of these guys, Kakhramonov is probably got the very slight edge, but there's not a lot in this at all. Ronnie Lawrence has got a karate background. He's got decent strikes. He's got volume. He's got good accuracy. He's got power. We've seen him drop previous opponents as well in his last fight against Mana Martinez, dropped him multiple times. So it's a really, really good fight. The striking between both of these fighters is close. The wrestling I would have on the side of Ronnie Lawrence, the grappling is going to be close as well. The one thing that Ronnie Lawrence has got to be careful of in this fight is Kakhramonov does have sneaky good front chokes. So as long as Ronnie Lawrence is very conscious of where he's placing his head positioning on the takedowns, I think he would be absolutely fine. And I just have to side with the fighter that is completing, like I said, more than 9 takedowns on average per 15 minutes, a fighter that does have a high completion rate, a fighter that can shoot and complete 8, 9, 10 takedowns in a fight without it affecting his cardio. Because normally, more often than not, like I said with Merab Dvalishvili, Curtis Blades, these fighters tend to win fights just because of the sheer volume and the takedown numbers. So for that reason, I'm picking Ronnie Lawrence to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of On the Money Line. That's all for the breakdowns, for the predictions. I hope you all enjoyed the show. As always, I appreciate all the likes to the videos, the subscriptions to the MMA Play 365 YouTube channel. I'll always try and get back to the comments as well. It is me that replies in the comments on YouTube. So tell me who you're betting on. Tell me who you're predicting. Tell me if we disagree on a fight. And if you are betting on Saturday night, I wish you the best of luck. I wish you to smash the bookies and get that cash those tickets. And that's all from me. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again next week.